Mr. Duffy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just maybe to follow up on a few points that my colleague from Connecticut made. He's talking about increasing taxes, and he's looking at the amount of money that, if we increase taxes, would come into the federal coffers, I believe. Is there a correlation between the amount of taxes an investor may pay and the decisions they make to invest in their businesses or ideas? And I guess I'll throw that to you, Mr. Poole, Dr. Poole.
The answer is, of course. That's a no-brainer. Of course, because taxes affect the rate of return on an investment.
So it's fair to say that we aren't going to look at the same GDP pie and say if we raise taxes by 4% on a certain segment, we're going to be drawing from the same size of GDP. That very well may shrink because there's not enough, there's not as much investment, there's not as much jobs, there's not as much economic activity.
Will the gentleman yield for 5 seconds?
No.
I'm not in favor of tax increases, as following my colleague here, John Taylor. But my emphasis, above all, is that tax increases cannot solve the problem. If we do not go full bore on the spending side, we can't solve the problem. Now, I would be willing, if you had a grand compromise, possibly, depending on the nature of it, to accept some tax increases. But if Congress keeps coming back to tax increases to solve our problem, that solution will not work. It will fail.
And I would agree with you. And so, did you hear the State of the Union last night? Address?
Yes.
And the President had proposed that we cap spending at current levels as a way to get our budget under control. Do you think that's a sound plan to get our budget under control?
I do not, because I think that it depends on what spending you're talking about. I suppose that he's talking only about so-called discretionary spending.
I think he was, yes.
And there are essential functions of government that are financed that way, such as the work of Congress, the court system, national defense, the maintenance of domestic law and order. And if we do not tackle the entitlements, then we're going to fail.
Yes. And I'm going to pivot here quickly. I think most of folks in America here, when they looked at this finance reform bill, or Dodd-Frank, they were concerned that it didn't address Fannie and Freddie. There was some outcry in northern Wisconsin especially. And I think folks are concerned about having a government backstop to these organizations. And I've also heard, though, if we privatize Fannie and Freddie, there's a concern for what happens to our 30-year fixed rates, our mortgage rates, and also what that does to our housing market. Would any of the panel members speak to whether you favor privatizing Fannie and Freddie and what that would do to 30-year fixed rates?
I am absolutely opposed to privatizing them because it would put them back. After all, they were private companies before they were, quotes, conserved. But they had such strong political tie that they ended up costing the American taxpayer a huge amount of money, and I would not want to risk that happening again.
Okay. Anyone else? No?
I like this idea of gradually phasing them out through changing the conformable loan limits. I think that's a good way to proceed, and otherwise you could slow it down a little bit if you're worried about some of the particular mortgages, but I think we should do that.
Okay.
I think we should constrain the role of Fannie and Freddie. I don't think they should be allowed to be portfolio lenders, for example. I think the Congress needs to think carefully about whether it wants to encourage home ownership among certain classes of folks, and a new, smaller Fannie and Freddie that was funded by insurance charges, for example, on the users might be part of that thing. I do also think we need to separate concerns about affordable housing from these entities. I think conflating those is part of what led to the thing. So address affordable housing separately.
Okay. And is there a correlation, though, with 30-year fixed rates and the implicit belief that government is backing up these loans?
Not necessarily. That wouldn't happen to be the case. And incidentally, locking people into 30-year mortgage is not necessarily a good idea because it may reduce their job mobility. So I would let people make that choice themselves. I don't understand why the government should subsidize it and encourage people to go one direction or another.
Very well. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I yield back.
Thank you. Our final questions will come